Good morning. My name is Carol Presso, and I'm going to be your moderator today for this discussion with global HR leaders on setting the course for recovery after the great lockdown. I'd like to welcome our panel, and I'm going to introduce our panel to all of you. My pleasure to introduce Leila Nascimento. Leila is the president of the World Federation of People Management Associations. She speaks to us from Brazil this morning. Johnny C. Taylor Jr., my apologies. He's president and chief executive officer for the Society for Human Resources Management from the US of A. We have Peter Cheese. He's the chief executive from the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, speaking to us from the UK. Anthony Originello is president and chief executive officer, Chartered Professionals in Human Resources, Canada. D'Amica Fernando, welcome. He's president of the Chartered Institute of Personnel Management, speaking to us today from Sri Lanka. Lucas van Wees, he's president of the European Association of People Management from the Netherlands. Liselotte Ortega. Liselotte is the first vice president of the Inter-American Federation of Human Resources Management, speaking to us today from Panama. And finally, but not least, Jorge Horugi, he's immediate past president of the WFPMA, speaking to us today from Mexico. So welcome all. Quite an impressive, distinguished panel speaking to us from every corner of our great world that we live as. And thank you to our attendees that are sitting in and viewing this from around the world. Wanted to let everyone know that we will have a link to this live stream made available to everyone, as well as a report that will be shared very broadly. I would like now to turn the mic over to Anthony Originello from Canada to say a few welcoming words.
Thank you very much, Carol, and welcome everybody. I want to begin by saying how fortunate we all are to have this opportunity, not only to talk about the current crisis, but about the vital work that will be required of us in the future as professionals and as citizens of our countries in the world. We have many lessons to learn, and the discussion should inform us all. But I think we've already had one basic fact driven home in the most dramatic way possible. And that is that people are job one for everyone. We now confront the challenge of defining people first policies, not just for the digital age, but for an age shaken to its core by the virus. It's clear that our profession can come together, as we have today, to inform and shape these policies. Just as financial experts were called upon to lead the recovery during the financial meltdown of 2008, HR professionals now will play key roles in the recovery from this pandemic at both the corporate and societal levels. And it's clear that the time to start our work is now. So I want to thank you again, everyone, for being here today. And I would now like to invite Leila Nascimento, the president of the World Federation of People Management Association, to say a few words. Leila, please.
Thank you, Anthony. Dear HR leaders, hello from Brazil, Rio de Janeiro. It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you. The COVID pandemic has drastically changed the world of work we live. This is not business as usual, and it is a time of great stress and uncertainty. But it is also a moment in time when the HR community must work together, because what we do across all organizations all over the world is most critical. Leaders worldwide are relying on HR professionals to navigate these challenges, present eyes with an opportunity to rise to the calling. Crises come and go, but it is our leadership in times like this that demonstrate our value. If you need any support at all, please reach out to me or your WFPMA Regional Federation leader. We'll do our best to provide you with the support you need. And please take care of yourselves and your loved ones. It is a first WFPMA webinar. You'll be pleased pleased to have Anthony Ariganello from Canada coordinate this webinar. Anthony Ariganello is a member of the World Federation Board. I thank Anthony and all the speakers who are leaders and work in their countries, in the National Association, and today are dedicated their time to WFPMA in this sad moment of pandemic. Together, you keep our workers and the workplace safe and healthy, and create better workplace for all. Thank you for your virtual presence here. Thank you, Anthony. Please, your coordination now.
Thank you very much, Leila. Thank you for those kind words on Tony's behalf, and thank you, Tony, to start setting the stage for this discussion. So, as Anthony pointed out, our purpose today is to begin to laying the steps, laying the groundwork for a post-lockdown era. Since March, we've seen governments around the world respond to the emergency posed by the virus and support for those who are most heavily impacted by the pandemic. Governments are essentially dealing with two crises, the health crisis and the unemployment crisis. We have two main areas for discussion today. The first is what is needed to ensure workplaces recover from the pandemic and set the course for a healthy, thriving workforce, growth, economy. And the second, how as a profession can we ensure organizations of all sizes are in the best situation to start up again. I'm going to invite these global HR leaders to share their ideas To our attendees from around the world, thank you for joining us. You may use the chat function on the application to send in your questions and your comments. We already have a few here. One is about not enough sound. Our sound is good on this end, so if you have trouble hearing us, it comes from your end. So sorry about that, but I hope things will work out. Although you may not see your comments, we will, and I as a moderator will make sure your questions and comments are moving into the discussions. Finally, as I mentioned, the video of the live stream will be available and will be shared through the WFPM. So let's get started here. Let's get started with sort of an issues overview and then a general discussion. And I will be asking you as panelists to try to identify what the main challenges facing employers as the health crisis subsides, as the famous curve starts planking and restrictions are lifted and a gradual return to work is anticipated. And to set the tone for this discussion, I'm going to invite Johnny, Peter, and Anthony to say a few words. We'll start with Johnny Taylor from the United States.
Well, good morning. Good morning for me and for around the world. It may be evening or what have you. Leila, so great to see you. Thank you for your leadership. And Anthony, thank you as well for co-leading. We really appreciate that all you're doing to ensure that HR globally is represented in this issue. So I'm sitting here in Washington, D.C., as we are grappling, like most of you all around the globe are, with this pandemic. And I just have to tell you, I'm naturally an optimist, and we at SHRM are oftentimes focused on, okay, what next? But what really gave me some incentive and some excitement and reason to be positive was a lot of what Anthony said and Leila supported, was that this is the moment for HR. If you think about those of us who've been in this work for years, we've wanted that seat at the proverbial table. And we wanted our business leaders and government leaders to understand, appreciate, and value the importance of HR. Well, sadly, it had to come to this. I was speaking with the CEO the other day, big multinational, US-based, but multinational, operating in over 100 countries. And he said to me, I have had more conversations, more dialogue with my CHRO in the last 8 weeks than I had in the prior 8 years. And it was an aha moment for me. It made me understand, he said to me, he said, it made me understand how valuable HR was and how much I may have missed out on in not bringing that person into the conversations about how we generally ran our business. Because in our mind heretofore or in the past, we thought the business was about manufacturing and customer delivery and sales, and we didn't really appreciate how much of that was dependent upon people. So I would ask all of my colleagues here, as I know we do, to really appreciate that this is a great moment. This really is for HR professionals what technology professionals experienced with Y2K and what finance professionals experienced with the 2008 meltdown. Financial meltdown. This is our opportunity. And I'm really pleased to say that it feels like right now we are all globally addressing it and standing up and leading. So this is a great moment for us. What SHRM has done as a result of this is we've said it's great to look back. We've had 3 phases. Phase 1 was to protect all of our employees in the workplace. That was number 1. When we didn't know exactly how this was going to operate, what this virus meant, we said, how can we protect people in the workplace? Phase 2 was to remove those employees. Largely 78% of American workers are now in America are working remotely. So we said our second phase as HR is to move employees remotely and continue to get work out of them, which was no small feat. The third phase that we're in now is thinking about how do we bring people back to work? Who do we bring back to work? Under what circumstances? And this is literally going to change the entire way that we think about workers, work, and the workplace. So what I asked we have a team, it's the knowledge department, filled with PhDs, statisticians, IO psychologists, and other researchers. They're challenged with finding out what's the best way forward. And we said, just as they do in the medical sciences, they go out and conduct research and study, we need to do the same thing in the social sciences or in the human behavior sciences. So we have been studying, surveying employees as well as employers, political leaders as well, and this is globally. It's largely focused on the US, but because we have members in 165 countries, it was really important for us to survey around the globe. We now have some top-line findings that I'd like to share with you very briefly before my colleagues join us. 1, 71%, that is nearly 3 in 4 employers, are struggling to adjust to remote work. And on multiple levels. Some of our employers, especially the small and medium-sized companies, simply did not have the technology infrastructure to do this. It sounds easy for large employers, multinationals, to ask people to work home remotely because most of our employees already had laptops, and we had all of the Zoom technology and Windows chat, and we had all of that, and our employees were prepared for this better than small and medium-sized employers. Well, a number of them are struggling. It was getting people home was one thing, continuing their productivity was a different thing. And so many of them are struggling through that, 71%. The second observation from employers is that 65% of them are maintaining employee morale, but it's been difficult. Very, very difficult. I don't know about you all, but I am hearing, from my own employees, we have about 500 employees here domestically. We also have about 100 employees in India and about 4 or 5 in our Dubai office, our Middle East, North Africa office. And I can tell you the isolation that, prior to this, everyone loved the idea of work from home. And now I'm talking with employees, and what they're telling us is, this is hard. I'm here with my children. I have to take care of children. I have a spouse here. And it's playing itself out in that it is really impacting morale. So one of our major observations from a people management perspective as HR professionals is to fully understand the mental health issues that are coming out of and arising out of the COVID issue, COVID virus, and what that means, especially for employees and ultimately their productivity and mental health. The third area is that more than a third of employers are facing difficulties with company culture. I've mentioned employee productivity and leave regulations, and I'm going to address those very quickly. Company culture. Yes, one can engage and build a company culture remotely, but it's harder. It really is. There's nothing, as we all know, that can replace the personal interactions and the ability for leaders, and I'm not just talking the CEO or the managing director, executive director, down into the organization. There's nothing better than face-to-face interactions. That's what human beings do and how we react. And so company culture is being eroded, and we're very, very concerned about that. The second area is employee productivity. There was almost a naivete about assuming that the more people now would not have to spend time commuting, they wouldn't have to get up in the morning and get dressed, they wouldn't have to take a break to go out and have an hour-long lunch, that we would be more productive. Our research is telling us that that's true for about 31% of employees say they are more productive working remotely. The remaining almost 70%, 69% to be exact, are saying I am either as productive or less productive. So this assumption that we had that by giving people back an hour a day, an hour in the morning to get to work and an hour to come back at least, would make them more productive because all they needed to do was roll over and start working. It's not necessarily operating that way. And the third area is leave regulations. You all, most of the world is frankly, and as I can admit this, was more advanced than the United States was on leave regulations. We're still trying to sort paid leave. We've had, through what we call the Family and Medical Leave Act, we had unpaid leave for 12 weeks per year, but we did not have paid leave. And the problem is people were willing to come to work sick if you were not going to make it paid leave, because they were being forced to choose between providing for their families or themselves or coming to work and not coming to work and protecting their health. So people were making decisions, and that has forced us, at least in the United States, to revisit all of our leave regulations and specifically our paid leave, because having leave without pay in many ways is not having leave. So ultimately, these are the top level challenges that employers are experiencing. And this isn't Sherm's opinion. This is based upon the research that we're doing every day, a combination of pulse surveys, as well as real specific research done once a week so that we can begin to follow the changes in the behavior. Turning to my next slide, let's talk about business practices. We're talking with CEOs to understand how is this impacting their businesses, and a lot of it is intuitive, no surprise, some of what we're hearing, but CHROs now are having a much bigger place in the conversation around how the business is running. I don't know if you saw, but Boeing, the big aircraft engineer manufacturing company, just announced that in Washington State, not Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is our U.S. capital, but Washington State, which is on the west coast of the United States, has just announced that it's bringing 27,000 employees back to work this week. And that was a major statement because the country hasn't quite gotten there, but they ultimately have decided that this has had such a negative impact on its business and that its employees have to come back because many of them are now, if you're not laid off, we now have 21 million US citizens, and the number is going up every day, on unemployment. And we've never seen anything like this in our history, as we know it, modern history. And so it's a big deal for us. And so employers are starting to say, what must we do? I want to talk about those very quickly. The coronavirus has prompted 40% of employers to shut down certain aspects of their business, not necessarily the entire business, but for sure certain aspects of it. And 83% of employers have had to adjust their business practices. A couple of observations. One, half are no longer hiring at all. And that's not necessarily because they don't have jobs to hire. It's just they have found that it's too difficult to make a total hire of someone without sitting across the desk, across the table, in the room with them. So they've made the decision not to hire. So to be clear, it's not that they don't have open jobs. 50% of American companies are not saying we're no longer hiring because we don't have jobs to fill. We're saying we just can't do it properly. Some of them are saying because there are no jobs, but most are saying we don't feel comfortable doing this fully via technology. Secondly, about a third of our employers have laid off workers, period. 15%, an additional 15%, that gives you almost 46, 50% almost, have cut headcount. And sadly, many of them have no intention to rehire. So these are not temporary adjustments. These are going to be long-term implications. 38% of them, nearly 40%, have decreased employees' hours. We refer to that as a furlough versus a layoff. A layoff is more permanent. You no longer work for the company. A furlough is a reduction of hours or down to zero for a limited period of time. And nearly 20% have reduced pay. One of our largest employers, with two major hospitality companies based in the DC area, Marriott hotels and Hilton hotels combined account for about 600,000 employees globally. And they have literally laid off 90% of their workforce, and the remaining 10% have taken pay cuts. 14%, more positively, have hired more employees. And I know that seems a little counterintuitive, but Walmart, and if you think about the distribution outlets, grocery stores, they have really begun hiring. Walmart, one of our former board members, is now most recently become the CHRO at Walmart, Donna Morris, and she's announced 150,000 new hires. So there are hot spots. If you're lucky enough to be working for Georgia Pacific, is the name of the company here, but it's owned by the Coke company, it's a big multinational company. They make paper products. Toilet paper, which we all know has become the big national craze. They make toilet paper. And so they are running at 100% capacity. So there are some bright spots in the economy. And another 10% are considering hiring employees. And then finally, a third, as I mentioned, are offering additional paid leave for their employees. And another 18% are considering it. Again, that may, for many of you on the call, think, well, everyone's doing that. Well, no, that wasn't the case in the United States. We were behind significantly on that issue. So finally, I wanted to just talk about what I believe and what our research is telling us is going to change the way of work. Some of it is going to be intuitive and you'll immediately get it. Remote work will become a widely accepted alternative. We know that. In fact, there was recently a study conducted of chief financial officers by PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC, and they have said that a significant number of CFOs are now sharpening their pencils, and they're reviewing whether or not we want to bring employees back into a traditional workspace. And it's not about safety, it's about saving money. The idea is, now that we know this population that we thought could never work remotely can, then maybe we can save money by not bringing them back into the workplace. Obviously, the cost of rent in those office spaces are not insignificant. But think about it. When you bring employees to work, you offer free coffee. You oftentimes offer snacks and food, and there's air conditioning. And these are costs that now CFOs are saying, we don't have to spend that. So going forward, it's not just that the employees are going to have a choice of whether or not to work remotely. I think a lot of companies are going to make that decision for them and are going to hire that way. Finding talent is going to become easier. It stands to reason that if you have 21 million people looking for jobs versus the 400,000 that you had before 3 or 4 months ago, that there's going to be a market now for buyers versus sellers, which is what we were experiencing. Virtual learning is going to expand dramatically, partially because people now are more comfortable, our employees are more comfortable with having to rely on technology, so they don't need to go to a meeting. They can go to meeting, if you will, with Zoom or technology. The other part of it, though, is that it's going to be incumbent upon people to build their skills. We know we've been preaching to everyone, learning and development, how important it is to upskill. Well, employees are going to have to, because they're coming into a far more competitive environment than ever before. And so they're going to have to get better. Virtual reality is largely what we're doing now. We're working together, all of us meeting around the globe right here in one place and collaborating, and that's going to be the norm. Telemedicine is an area that we're seeing a lot of uptick in. The idea in the past was that you had to go see a doctor. That was the only way you felt like you had legitimately taken care of your health. And the reality now is that doctors and nurse practitioners have proven themselves quite successfully able to diagnose and treat a lot of illnesses remotely. So we're going to see far more telemedicine, and specifically mental health, which is an area that we've seen a significant jump in, is the demand for mental health as people try to work through this. Finally, and it ties to my first point about remote work, employers have announced they are going to be more fiscally conservative than they were in the last decade. So we are now seeing them question whether or not I need 100 employees. Can we do this work with 90? And do those employees have to come into the workplace, and all sorts of decisions? Do you need to travel to business meetings when we do come up? So those are ultimately the observations that we have so far. I'm looking forward to hearing from my colleagues about your experiences and observations around the world. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Johnny. This has been a great way to sort of introduce our first block of discussion. I'm going to ask Peter Cheese. Are you still there, Peter? To give us a few Peter is in the UK, to say a few words to launch the topic.
Yeah, thank you, Carol. Thank you, Johnny. Thank you, Anthony, also for pulling us all together. I think we're all agreeing that this is a time for HR, and I think, as Anthony said, the last big crisis, the global financial crisis, was a financial crisis, as its name implied. This is a much bigger humanitarian and people-oriented crisis. So this is a real time for the profession to come together and to strengthen itself. All the HR directors I talk to, CHROs, are all saying they have never worked so hard, but at the same time acknowledging and recognizing this is an opportunity. And to paraphrase others, when with crises of this nature, can both represent danger, of course, but they can represent opportunity. And I remember that was something that President Kennedy once said, or to use another person, Winston Churchill also said, don't let a good crisis go to waste. And the reality is, without being crass about this, is because this is causing real harm and real danger to so many people. This crisis, which is the biggest and era-defining crisis, I think will redefine many things about work. But what we have to be careful about is, as we come out of the transition, is that this does not just revert to how do I prop up my short-term profits again as fast as possible? How do I cut costs as fast as possible? Because we have learned, I think, a lot of things through this crisis already about the centrality of people in business. Just as you said, Johnny, and it's been said to me many, many times by people that you really only have two things in business. You got money and you got people. And we certainly know how to count the money, but we haven't always done the right thing for people. So I think, at its heart, this crisis is putting much more into the front of the corporate agenda, this debate about people. Do we understand our people? How we look after them, our duty of care to them. If we have to reduce our costs, which so many businesses do in this crisis, how do we do that in the right way? Johnny, you called out lots of different options as to what organizations are doing. What are the principles that drive us in doing this? And in some countries, including the United Kingdom, under furloughing arrangements, governments are putting huge amounts of money into businesses so that they can retain their workforce without necessarily having to make them redundant. There are financial questions, legal questions, but also ethical and moral questions about what we do right here. So I think I would agree with a lot of the commentary, and certainly as we've done surveys, we've found very similar things about how organizations are responding. But I think as we move forwards into the return to work, it's what have we learned from this crisis? What will we do differently, which is good for people and good for businesses and good ultimately for society and for economies? Because we have to recognize that a lot of what's been going on in the world of work leading up to this crisis hasn't all been good. The well-being of our people, the stress at work, how even we've implemented technology which has not always taken account of people effectively, how we've taken a long time to really adapt work to be more flexible, to meet everybody's different needs so that we can create more inclusive working cultures. And it's really interesting to see the many, many trends around the world of work, which were about presenteeism, about people feeling they had to be present because that's the only way that they were going to get judged about how they work. And that plays out in so many different ways. It's everything from how men might take paternity leave alongside women and share more of the burdens of homework. And these are profound, profound things, which, as I said, we've been talking about for some time. So to build on that thought that this crisis is also an opportunity, I think it's genuinely an opportunity to shift the dialogue on some of the most important things about what is responsible business, what is responsible and sustainable business that looks after its people, that is not just looking at the short-term view of the world about how I maximize my profits. It's about understanding what's sometimes been called multi-stakeholder capitalism, which is this idea that I do not just have a responsibility to my financial shareholder, which of course is important, but I have a fundamental responsibility to my people, my workforce. I have a fundamental responsibility to my customers, my suppliers, the communities of which businesses are part of and which we've sometimes forgotten, and indeed the environment, because let's not forget the other great crisis, which is already apparent to us before this one, this health crisis started, was the environmental crisis. So I think if you take it all the way from that idea of the principles that should be driving our thinking about multi-stakeholder capitalism, about our duty of care to our people, about doing the right things, about taking the long view, about investing properly in their skills, their development, and their well-being, those are the opportunities that I think emerge from all of this crisis. But they are tough things to do, and exactly as you said, Johnny, I mean, some businesses have done this more naturally because I think the leaders get why this is important. And where CHROs have been trying to argue their case, often tripping over, yeah, but I might want to do that, but that's not going to prop up my share price, or that's going to cost me too much in the short term. This is the time to change the dialogue at the highest levels of business thinking. And then, of course, ensure that we're supporting the profession in enacting all of this stuff at all these different levels. Because to recruit in very inclusive ways, to worry about people's well-being, to support flexible working in all these different forms is not easy. If it was easy, we probably would have done it a lot better in the past. But this crisis has shown that it is possible, and that now is how we need to step up as HR professionals and show not only how it's possible, but why it's important, and why ultimately by doing these things will drive better business, which is more sustainable and more responsible, which looks after its people better, which therefore encourages all these ideas of engagement and loyalty and indeed productivity. So that's what in many ways excites me about this, and I don't want to be crass about it, because as I said, there is no doubt this is a real tragedy on so many different levels of humanity, but it has to be seen as something that can trigger, I think, a lot of things which are long overdue about how we thought about people in the context of work, and particularly adding on all this debate now, which we're all involved in, about the future of work, which has been going on a long time, about technology. Now's the opportunity to bring all the really human dimensions of the future work to the front and center of organizational thinking, position HR right in the heart of that debate. But as I said, in order to do those things, we've got to train and support our profession. But we've also got to make sure, and this is another, I think, part of our agenda here today, is to strengthen our voice as a profession into the highest levels of business and the highest levels of governance and policy making. And that I see, as I said, in a positive sense of what can come out of this crisis.
Thank you, Peter. That's a great challenge you've given me, and given all of us, actually, given me in terms of the discussion and how we move it forward, and how we're going to move in a few minutes into the discussion of best practices. And what are those strong messages that we as a profession can deliver? I'm going to ask Tony to present, to make a presentation. He's got a few slides here, and let me just bring them up so that we can go to that. So thank you. I will turn it to Anthony Originello from Canada.
Thanks, Carol. Similar to the United States and what we heard from Johnny, the world of work here in Canada will look very different post-pandemic as well. Angus Reid, which is a leading polling company here, commissioned a study most recently and asked Canadians a number of questions. One of them was around the economy, and they were asked, as a result of the coronavirus, how concerned are you about the Canadian economy? And as you see there, 95% of Canadians stated they were extremely or very concerned about the status of the Canadian economy going forward. Additionally, if you look at the next chart, they were asked what kind of changes did they see in their workplace. So the next chart, Carol. And what you'll see is 44% of Canadians stated that they were now working from home, and approximately 17% stated their companies had shut down, and another 16% were working less hours. A little less than what we saw from the United States, but nonetheless, still a dramatic change here in terms of workplace environment. And lastly, the next chart was really what resonated for me. They were asked, when life goes back to normal, how do you feel you will engage in these following areas? And these findings for me are quite interesting for both employers and governments. Approximately 33% stated they will likely work more from home. Another third roughly said they would be using video calling or conferencing for meetings going forward. And another 33% said they would likely vacation less or travel less in future. And lastly, about a quarter, 25%, stated they would take public transit less. So this will definitely impact the workplace economy and future GDP growth. So, when we look at this, one needs to really start reflecting on the sentiments as we re-engage, because it will certainly not be the so-called back to normal. And clearly, when we talk about GDP and the effect on some industries, when you see findings like this in terms of sentiment, we're going to have to readjust because things will not be the same. And we've heard that obviously for both Johnny and Peter. So I think from an HR perspective, we really need to start thinking and planning what is that going to mean for the workforce growth.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you for that overview. Let's open it up to the others that haven't had a chance yet. So the question here is, what will the world of work look like post-pandemic? And what are the key issues facing the profession, employers, and governments? And we've had a really good overview of the situation. And one of the things that come to mind for me is when we're looking at some of the data that Tony is presenting. There's a little bit of noise in the background. Can you just sort of mute your speakers, please? And I'll keep an eye out on who wants to go first on this. And so we have this massive group of people who are able to work from home. However difficult the situation is, as Johnny explained, that not everybody is as productive as people would want to be, and they're dealing with young children, aging parents, and many other constraints, including physical constraints and psychological constraints. But the day after, but looking at the other group of people that are not able to work from home, because they're the people stocking our grocery shelves. Those are the people that are lower wage employees and our health workers and our bus drivers. So there is this big, so what are the steps that employers need to take to get to that place? And I'm also wanting to put on the table here the psychological aspects of the pandemic. Just open it up.
Yeah, maybe here, Carol, from Lucas van Wees from the Netherlands, just to comment on that. Thanks again for all of the introductions, by the way, very interesting, and I think also quite similar to some of the stories as we have them here in Europe. I would say first, from the European perspective, there was just announced and released a study from McKinsey. And that is saying that when it comes to the workforce in Europe, and I'm now counting the 27 members of the European Union plus the United Kingdom, there is a sense that the whole crisis will impact around 25% of the workforce. And if the whole story will develop and even become worse, we will probably double the size of unemployment in Europe, and that then again might move back to more regular numbers by the year 2024. But now back to your question on how to deal with the situation when it comes to the workplace. There has now been some studies in what we call the 1.5 meters economy. So that's around 2 yards, I would say, all over the world. And some of those surveys are saying that the economy can deal with it and the workforce can deal with it. Around 90%, 90 of the workforce could work in a situation where we will continue with, I would say, a 2 yards distance with co-workers. So around 10% of the workforce will not be able to deal with that. And so for that part, it will be difficult to cope with the crisis in the day-to-day workforce. So we can get to a certain point, but we will probably not get to the full point when it reaches to 100% of the workforce. And for instance, part of the hospitality workers, that will be really difficult to deal with the post-corona world if we will still have it for a number of time with us. So that is not easy, I think. Yeah.
Good. Thank you. Thank you for that.
This is Johnny. I'll chime in there. Is that okay?
Go ahead.
Okay, so the two issues that I think will profoundly impact people, in addition to what Lucas said, which is spot on, is how we're going to reconfigure office space. We can't do it fast enough. So, you know, we've worked to take advantage of density in office spaces. You think about call centers and people working next to each other, and all the rage just 6 months ago was on open air office spaces, and people were interacting and sitting in these little rooms together. Well, that's done. So there's a big question about how quickly we can reconvert all of that space such that, as I said, and I think that's why employers are going to say, tear the walls down that we just put up, right? Got it. But also, we're not going to go double our commitment to office space because we can't afford it. So I think it's going to be this combination of redoing the office space and then forcing some employees to work remotely. And that's a concern. Every employee does not do well working remotely. We've made the assumption that just because we can provide for their remote work, that employees want to do it. And we know that there are a significant number of employees who have no interest in working remotely, particularly if it's forced. They don't mind it if it's, I just had a kid, so for 3 months I'm going to work remotely. You know, specific reasons. It's about workplace flexibility, not mandatory work from home. That is not being well received. So there's going to be this tension, and I think employers' number one challenge is if you're going to represent the 6 foot, 2 kilometer, how do you refer to it, Lucas? There's a term, what you say, they call it the...
Yeah, it's the 1.5 meter economy, we call it. And now
yeah.
in the Netherlands, indeed, Johnny, every part of the economy has to get in and sign up and deliver protocols, how
Yes.
to do it for hospitality or how to do it for construction work or whatever. And then the government has to agree to that. And then we reopen that parts of the economy. That is the way moving forward in quite some of the economies in Europe. And there's a lot of science to that.
Yes.
Especially, and a lot of advising on that from the scientists to the governments in how to gradually open up the economies and then look to what it means in terms of results, and then again re-evaluate it and move forward on that base.
And to that point, the second point that I was going to raise is, but will human beings respect that? So the government, you can put forth a great work plan. The question is, will employees, and I'm seeing it now in grocery stores here in the US, where you go to get your food, they have X's every 6 feet or 1.5 meters. Invariably, no one is respecting those X's, that space, because human beings just haven't, and now maybe over time they will. So it's a great plan. The question is whether or not human beings will act that way. And the only other point I raised is, I think, as Anthony pointed out, in Canada, 25% of the people who take public transportation have now said they're rethinking that decision. How in the world can we move? Think about New York City, 8-10 million people coming in. There's no way to move that number of people into New York, Manhattan per day, no matter how you distance it. There are not enough trains. It's impossible to do. So the question becomes, if you can't respect the 1.5 meters to just get people to work, forget about, and then you have a problem that what our research says is 90% of employees in the US have said they are less likely to use public transportation after this. So how do you get people to work?
And I'm not going to put it on the table, but climate change.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
the huge infrastructure projects that many cities have undergone to build up public transit. That's a subject for another day, but an
Yes, it
important
is.
one. So we haven't heard from Liselot, Dominica, Jorge. Would you like to jump in here?
Sure. Hi, everyone, and thank you for having us here today. In Latin America, the thing is a little bit more different. Here, governments overall have approved not only a state of emergency immediately as they were advised of the pandemic, and but also some legal things have been approved recently. We have reduction of work hours. We have sent people in vacation. We have paid and unpaid leaves because we do have that in our labor codes. But also they are approving the suspension of the work contract, meaning that you will stay working with the company, but for 3 months you will be at home receiving no pay and you won't have to work for the company. So for Latin America, the scope is very much different. People is right now trying to keep on working on home office or having a reduction of hours instead of receiving a note for the suspension of their contract. For those that the contract will be suspended for, first of all, the measurements are for 1 month, but then you can ask for another month or 2, depending on what the governments will say. For those, the government are paying a bonus of $300 per month. So for a family to live with that amount of money will be something very difficult, considering that in the majority of the cases, at least 2 children will be at home and the spouse. So the scope and what the people is worrying right now is the unemployment is increasing. Latin America have shown for the past years a hit in their economy due to many political things that have been going on. And after this, unemployment will definitely grow. And what we need to do right now is be more creative. Although this pandemic have brought to the state that human resources leaders are more in contact with the CEO, but also with the government. Thank God we are smaller. So now we have that direct line to the Minister of Labor. We're now working with them on new policies, on new things to be approved. And that was some of the best steps that I think this chaos brought with it. Change, and in a sudden change due to the chaos, and we needed to resolve. So home office law was approved recently in the majority of the Latin American countries, which was not even in discussion in the past month. In Panama, for instance, it was approved in February. So now, even though we have people that were working from home before this, people who worked in call center, for example, that was something because they were working for a multinational. But for the majority of the companies which were not a multinational company, home office was not approved by law. So now we're changing on that aspect. What is necessary right now, or what is the main concern? Cybersecurity. What about our data? What about our information that is going on? And now we have, since we have to rush into this, how can we adapt that worker house or home in order to fulfill all our needs in regards to security or cybersecurity? Even though we have the systems all arranged in our jobs to give that VPN or that entrance into our systems, there can be, there's a lot of questions regarding the security. Also, what we notice is that definitely companies are reducing force. Unemployment will grow definitely, and last but not least, we're seeing some other areas that are increasing. Those that work in medicine, those that work in the pharmacies, and those that work for deliveries. Deliveries are now the #1 job available right now, and it's increasing. We now see more informality and people opening new businesses as we go on with this pandemic. Definitely, one of the major hits will be for those small and medium businesses, which were hiring a lot of our workforce. They will be the ones receiving the hit economically and financially, and that will be something that the governments will have to work out and see how give them some type of help in order for them to move on with loans or whatever type of benefits or incentives that can be approved in order for the economy to start rolling out.
Thank you, Lizola. That's very good. We're going to go to Damika and then we're going to go to Jorge. But I just want to say that some of the initiatives in Canada, for example, has been a lot about maintaining the employer-employee relationships through a wage subsidy program, or even those employees that were furloughed were access to some funds, some emergency funds to allow to maintain. That was the importance of maintaining that relationship so that you wouldn't have millions of people find themselves unemployed. Damika, you're up.
Yes, Carol, thank you very much. And Tony, thank you very much for organizing this webinar for all of us. And thank you everyone for your participation. And first and foremost, and let me wish you all in true traditional Sri Lankan style long life, that is Ayubowan, now which is adopted by many countries in the world because of this emergency, the COVID situation, and which is actually a beautiful, meaningful, and a mindful greeting during this health emergency. And also, I would like to speak on behalf of the CIPM Sri Lanka and also the AFRAM continental body, the most humanly rich region of the world. Well, I take this opportunity to announce once again that the World HR Congress 2020, which was fixed to take place in Sri Lanka, hosted by CIPM in July, was postponed to the first quarter of 2021 because of this situation. And the new date, we will let you know very soon. See, some of these post-COVID key issues will be the kind of this painful decision that I have just announced, costing colossal amount of money and resources. The post-COVID world will never be the same and will bring about many testing, many lasting changes to the world of work. We as people professionals need to be prepared, the people ready for the new order in the world of work. Because of the COVID situation, that many organizations had to cancel many of their events in this part of the world and planned an acquisition of goods and services. The economic consequences of the lockdown to organizations in the Asia Pacific region is enormous. And especially the construction of economies felt all over the world. As Pricewaterhouse predicted, $2 to $4.1 trillion is the amount lost to the global economy. And the expected real global GDP growth will be less than 2%. Most of the Asian economies are served by the strong foreign direct investment and the and the export economy. Now, Since industries need governmental support by way of tax relaxation and duty waivers, etc., if we are to retain the and generate employment, but on the other hand, the governments of Asian economies are hit with a scarcity of foreign reserves. And unlike the governments have promised or done in the West and in the United States, and also in Oceania, the governments cannot afford to provide the industries with any tangible stimulus packages. And plus, many of the Asian economies have no retirement benefits at the time of many unemployment benefits of quick yielding social security systems like some other countries in the Western world. And also some of the countries only have the retirement benefits at the time of retirement. But for those who have engaged in regular employment, and furthermore, those who work on a daily wage and also who are the self-employed workers, they don't have any kind of security system. And also the unregulated sector are in a dire situation. Very recently in public speech, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Mr. Imran Khan, stated that there can be more post-COVID deaths due to starvation than it is to the COVID-19 situation. And in this part of the world, if the world bodies such as United Nations and IMF do not take charge of the situation, and also the other lending institutes and countries have to have a long look at the situation and take some pragmatic measures in debt rescheduling, etc. And also employers in turn started to feel the heat, and some are already burnt out due to prolonged inactivity of world economy. Especially, this is always the case with most of the small and medium scale industries, as Ortega suggested earlier. And however, unsurprisingly, what was evident during this period is more than the SMEs, the conglomerates and multinationals are the ones who were taking drastic measures as far as their people decisions are concerned. And big players are really supposed to be the people champions in times of trouble and disaster. But according to the current available data, it is evident that in this part of the world that the world SMEs are the more resilient and agile with their people practices and the big corporates, than the big corporates. Out of the service sectors, the hospitality and travel industry are the most hit here in Sri Lanka as well as in the Southeast Asian nation. And we think that the measures that would help the economic recovery are a combine of measures which will have a significant and positive impact on the economies are. For example, funding-based initiatives, tax or grant-based initiatives, and supporting the employment in selective industries and change the way of work, that way we work, reskilling and the workforce and funding new ways of working. It costs one way to speedier recovery in boosting infrastructure development development fast in the post-COVID crisis, targeting sectors that could fast-track development and growth, accelerate upskilling and multi-skilling of employees, investing in technologies that would improve processes and workable business continuity plans, moving towards a resilient and agile work practices. I think these are some of the suggestions that I would like to make. And I also would like to place on record, at this stage, five buzzwords for us. One is resilience, agility, communication, leadership, and empathy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Damika. That's a very comprehensive presentation. We're getting to the end of our first round, if you want, and I'm going to let Jorge say a few words, and then we're going to move into... Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Carol. And I would like just to share with you all a quick reflection on how I see the situation in terms of the great opportunity and in several latitudes of the world, great proof that how employers and through HR have worked more closely during this pandemic situation with the workforce, either through unions or through directly to its non-unionized personnel, in getting agreements and with the workforce directly, sometimes in advance of what the governments have a rule to deal with these situations in terms of the salaries, situation negotiations, not only in the normal negotiations or bargaining processes, but how to deal with these unpaid leaves or paid leaves or partially. And I think that has been a great opportunity and also proof for our human resources profession. And also a great opportunity for the national HR associations and confederations that in order to deal with that, and besides all the good information previously shared by Johnny, by Peter, by Anthony, and by all of those who preceded me words in this conference, I think that it's a great opportunity and even more great after the post-pandemic to enforce and strengthen really the role of HR and the key of communication and especially speedy communications, rapid communications in a crisis. It has also a chance to provide value as HR organizations. That's the reflection I wanted to share with you all.
Thank you, Jorge. And we're going to come back to that point, that exact point, in the next block of questions, and the next bucket of questions, if you want.
Sure.
And we're going to do that just right now. I just want to invite our participants. There's about 125 of you out there listening in. Two things. Don't hesitate to send your questions into panelists. If they can't answer you right now, we will get answers back to you. We are collecting and collating the information. And second thing is that this live stream will be made available in audio video format in a few hours following the calls. So I saw someone mentioning that they're taking mad notes and taking screen grabs. Don't worry, listen in, participate. We'll make sure video gets to you. So to set the stage for the second discussion, this dialogue that we want to have on what is needed, I've all put a lot of great ideas on paper, and we back here in Ottawa, Canada, are fiercely writing, and yes, we are writing and taking note of some of the excellent suggestions. So we're going to come back to that. But I just want to say that we have Eduardo de la Garza Samaron to all panelists is saying, excellent panel, thank you all. So we're getting a lot of positive feedback from folks out there. So Johnny, I'm going to invite you to set the stage, and I'm going to, for this next discussion, and I am going to share your presentation with folks.
Well, thank you. I would also say, as we're pulling up the document, Fernando, I really appreciate those reminder of those 5 words, and I think they apply globally: resilience, agility, leadership, communication, and empathy. I was just busy chatting, writing them down, because I think we've all used some version of them, but that's a very nice and concise way for us to be mindful of what our responsibility is as we think about going forward. So thank you, Fernando, and I'm very sorry that we won't be with you all this summer. I was looking forward to Sri Lanka, to be honest, and having heard what this has done to your economy, I'm even more saddened by the fact that we won't be there to support you. But we're coming back, right? At some point, we'll be back there to support you. Good luck. Key considerations moving forward. The first is that the challenges ahead, and some of this is you already know, it's really intended to force a conversation. But as we think about what we're going to do going ahead, they're varied. They include potential long-term economic hardship. I think, again, it was Fernando who mentioned the fact that it may have been the Pakistani president who said, starvation is a real issue. If you don't die from the COVID virus, you far more may end up dying from starvation related to the negative financial implications, the wake effect of this. So this is real, and we have to think about that. And the ability to find capital. Certain parts of the more developed world won't have the challenges that growing and developing countries do. So we have to be very mindful of that as we think globally about talent and not just sort of myopically in your part of the world. That's important. Second is the newest clause of most business continuity plans will be an infectious disease policy. I think all of us were prepared for hurricanes and tsunamis and cyclones. I mean, that's, if you really think about it, we just never imagined, although there were movies, Hollywood has produced movies telling us that there could be a major contagion, but we thought that was Hollywood drama, right? There's no way this could really happen and shut the world down. Well, it's occurred. So now we are all being forced as HR leaders to think about what do business continuity plans look like in the future, particularly, and here's something that I think we all have to keep in mind. Prior to this, you could buy insurance for this, even if it were expensive, but you didn't think you needed it. Now you can't even buy it because the insurance companies simply can't take on the risk of a global shutdown. And they now know that it's possible. So this is far more complicated than a specific business interruption because of what we thought force majeure, act of God, earthquake. This is different, and I don't know how we're going to manage going forward, knowing that you can't assure against this. Organizations, and specifically HR, will need to be stewards of health, continuity, and wellness as the crisis persists. You read everything from we're going to have this sorted in the next 6-9 months, at least getting people back to work is stage one. But I'm going to submit to you that this is a mankind challenge going forward. How we adjust to it is really going to be top of mind for employees, their overall health, business continuity, and their personal lives, the continuity of their lives. And wellness is going to be critical, not just physical wellness, as I keep saying, but also emotional, mental wellness is critical. And finally, nearly 15% of organizations have already started their intent to permanently implement new realities of operations in the future. Carol asked, what will we do for frontline employees, people who have to go to work? What are we going to do when you walk into a grocery store? Will we forever be distant 1.5 meters? Will those people have personal protective equipment, PPE, gloves, and things covering their face? Is this a permanent reality? I was just thinking yesterday, I am a handshaker when I walk up to someone. We won't do that anymore. I mean, that is going to be a total change going forward, even if you dared to meet in person. You're not going to touch people going forward. So there are all sorts, and forget those of us who are huggers. When I think about the Latin American countries where you, Lisa, right? Ms. Ortega's like, yeah, we hug. Well, you won't do that anymore. And HR has got to deal and manage through what is going to be a new reality in more than just work. These are the key considerations that, as Lucas has said, and all of my colleagues, we've got to lead going forward, and this is a global challenge. And so I set it up with that and invite people to chime in.
Thank you, Joni. I think you had, okay, so this is your, great. Thank you very much. This is great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Johnny, for setting us up here. So the discussion here is what is needed. And Johnny and Jorge and Demika just before have really set the table for this part of this discussion. And I have a few sort of questions that I have is sort of, what are, some of the principles that should guide, for example, the return to work? And underlying all this, of course, and we want to talk about this, is how do we avail ourselves of the great opportunities provided to the HR profession? And so we'll talk about that when we get to next steps. But for now, so what are some of the best practices that we can point to? And I know that our economies are very different from Asia to North America, but how can we, what are the things? And at the same time, I'm throwing this all out to you. And at the same time, how do we message this to the decision makers, to the CEOs, and to government? How do we message this? What is needed?
Yeah, Carol, some thoughts. I mean,
Lucas,
first of
yes.
all, I think the returns to work are going to be gradual. They will be different. I mean, it was interesting listening to Lucas. You're talking about the 1.5 meter rule. In the UK, it's a 2 meter rule, as it happens. But the different cultures, different economies, different legislations will mean that some of the response and how we return to work will change. But I think in any economy, in any country, it's going to be gradual. It's going to be phased. The reality, as a number of people have said, it's not just can I protect people at work with social distancing or whatever, but what about them getting to work? And we cannot force people back into the office, even if we wanted to. And I tend to look at it, as I said before, from a couple of perspectives. One is, what have we learned from this process of remote working? I mean, the fact is we're all connecting in different ways. We're looking into each other's homes. We are talking about their families, and we're experiencing this in our own organization. There is, ironically, despite the separation, I think more human communication and connection than perhaps we've had in the past. So let's build on that. Let's take that forward. We've certainly learned that we can work in these very different ways. We can work more flexibly, and we should give people that choice. We have to give people that choice when they come back to work. As I said, you can't just force them. So taking forward those messages and being clear ourselves and what have we learned from this and what therefore do we want to drive forward as principles are really important. I think the other way to think about this is scenario planning. I mean, I do love these surveys when people say with great authority like McKinsey, this is how the world's going to look. The answer is we don't know. There are many different scenarios. You can look at different parts of the economy, which will be a V-shaped recovery, U-shaped recovery, L-shaped recoveries. I think a lot of this stuff is we don't know, and we should be a little bit more honest about that and recognize that actually there are a whole series of scenarios that should play out, and every organization, every business unit needs to think about scenarios. What are the possible upside scenarios that could happen? What are the possible really downside scenarios? And how do we deal with those? And how do we understand the different signals that might lead us into one or other of those scenarios? And then to take mitigating action. So I think that's the other thing. We can rely, as I said, too much on people coming out with big grand plans and big grand surveys, when actually we got to take some personal accountability, understand it in our own organizational context, look at different scenarios, work with management across all the different functions to say, what are those scenarios? How might they play out? And what are, as you said, Karen, as I said in my introductory thoughts, what are the principles that are going to drive us forward from this position where we can make work better, where we can be more flexible, where we can understand people's mental health and well-being as a central business agenda, not just some peripheral thing. And as I said, therefore, ultimately, and it will take time, but I think even when we use language like, well, it'll never look like this, or that economy may never recover. Well, they will over time, and they will recover at various points. And we finally have to worry, and again, as people have commented a lot, on what will be some of the unemployment challenges that we're facing. We have a shared responsibility. And what really worries me about this, I'm sure most of us have got children, is the effect on young people. We have literally, in the last 5 years, emerged in Europe out of an economy which in most countries had double the rate of unemployment amongst young people in the 20%. We've only more recently recovered from that. And that is going to be another knock-on effect of this crisis. And we really have to take some shared responsibility, particularly for helping young people back into work and gainful employment.
Thank you, Peter. We haven't heard the word precarity of work yet, and we haven't talked yet about what this does to work in general, but we're getting there. Lucas, you wanted
to... just to add, I think also, Peter, to your perspective, I think it's very true. What we see nowadays, and there's no other way to go around it, is that I would say with maybe 20-25% of information, we have to make now 100% decisions, and we don't know if those decisions are right. So this is a continuing story, but we have to make these decisions because this is also what the people are asking us for us to do, to make those decisions. And we hope they're right, but we're not sure they're right. I think the other thing is that goes back to, I would say, a lot of insights we know about pandemics, which happened, of course, also in history, that if you take a longer perspective, even pandemics doesn't affect a full reverse of society. What we see a lot is that trends which were already before pandemics become stronger after a pandemic. For instance, technology has been pretty heavy nowadays. It might become even heavier after this current crisis, as we've seen with the homework devices and all of that. And also when it comes to globalization, for instance, I don't think we will have a full reverse of globalization. We will have an alteration of globalization to some extent, but not a full reverse out of that. I think before the crisis, we had already, I would say, a trend on far more inclusivity in society. We will see that even more stronger after that. I also think that if you compare what will happen in the aftermath of this crisis, that government is really back on the stage. Maybe not there to stay, but everybody is looking now for government, to fuel the economy, also with the central banks, and to weather the storm and pumping a lot of money into the economy for that matter as well. I think that we will also see in a very different manner than we did before when it comes to our flexible stuff, which are pulled out of the economy at this moment. But I think we will have to deal with that also after this crisis in a very different way. So that will also, I think, fuel the political debate on how to deal with that as well. And also, I think that what we learned from the Great Recession in 2008 and also the Great Depression in 1929, I think we will also take that lessons when we are in the aftermath of this crisis. Because if we don't do that probably, not only in Europe, but also I think on the world, we will end up in the end in a big debate, and it will more divide us than bring us together if we don't take care of that from societal point of view as well. So there are some concerns of that, but I think that to speak with Karl Popper, we need to be optimistic, because if we are not optimistic, we will be out in the woods for a long, long time.
Thank you, Lucas. Anthony, you want to pipe in here?
Yeah, thank you, Carol. I just wanted to add one other element I think that's really critical for HR leaders as we move forward, and it's going to piggyback on a comment that Peter just mentioned, and that is around youth unemployment. And given this situation, the crisis that we're facing, it's also a financial crisis. We talk about a health crisis, but it's a huge financial crisis in the sense that, the unemployment numbers are huge, as we know, around the world. And more importantly, the debt to equity for most individuals is just ballooning every day. In most countries, I know in Canada, as an example, we had hit a record of somewhere around 170% debt to equity level for an individual. And that is only increasing on a daily basis because, as you know, individuals are having a very difficult time, those who are unemployed. And don't forget, only about a third of individuals are able to work from home. There's 2/3 of the workforce that cannot work from home and are relying on government stimulus, that being unemployment, or I should say employment insurance, and other programs that various governments have done. So what that means is people who have mortgages, people who have debt on their credit cards, while banks have deferred those or have allowed deferrals, that debt is still there and growing by the day. I mean, you go to a grocery store, as one noted, and people are paying with the credit card, and they're just adding that on in terms of debt. That debt has to disappear. So when one thinks about the future, and particularly the aging population that we've always referred to as one of these days, the baby boomers, et cetera, will retire, and that will create jobs for the younger generation, they may be forced to work longer. That will pose a really big challenge on HR leaders, and I think we need to have that top of mind, because this crisis, albeit a health one, right, it is actually a financial one too. And although governments are paying attention to it, government deficits are just going to continue to balloon, and sooner or later one has to serve that debt. And again, how do you do that? Through increased taxes. And that's a big issue that I think we need to continue to highlight and monitor, because that'll change the dynamic in terms of the workforce and how we bring in people into the workforce.
Okay, I'm going to turn it to Johnny, but just before, I'm going to ask our panelists to think about what from a people perspective, what are the priorities that should be addressed by governments? And I'm going to say not only from a people perspective, but from a workplace, worker and employment perspective, where are the priorities? And I'll turn it to Johnny and then open it up for discussion. Thank you.
I just had a quick point because I continue to harken back to Fernando's 5 words, but something Peter said and Anthony just alluded to, in addition to all of the empathy and communicate, when we communicate going forward, I think we as HR leaders have to agree to be honest and realistic. That is I'm very concerned that we are not going to have real candor when we bring people back into the workplace. What do I mean by that? I think we have to be straight up honest with people and say, I can't guarantee you workplace safety. We don't know enough about this virus, how it's transmitted, so we can do the 1.5 meters, 2 meters, 6 feet. We can follow all the right rules, and still there is some risk with waking up and walking outside of your house every day. And I think we have to be very careful not to represent to our employees that we can guarantee their safety and that we figure this all out magically. We will lose credibility, because if we tell people the workplace is safe to come into and then people begin getting sick, all of us are going to lose our most important capital, which is our integrity and people's belief in human resources. So it will be critical as we do this to add to that list, I would, honest, realistic, candid dialogue about the risk. And I'm thoughtful of what we did after our country experienced 9/11. We said, despite everything that we put in place, TSA and security measures and magnets and screening, this is not foolproof. There is some inherent risk in every interaction. And I think we could learn a lot from that as we think about that moment that the American country that we experienced. Criticality is around managing people's expectations and being honest.
And would you say that in doing so, it's part of the innovation that we hear that you're suggesting that innovation in HR practices, but that also has to be part of the dialogue with those that set those workplace standards, and that's government that set workplace and safety standards. And I had put a note in answer to my own questions, what the priorities, and one of it is a bit more simplification of rules and simplification of compliance. But on the same side of the simplification thing that I was thinking of, because it's also ensuring that workplaces are safe. And Johnny, to your point, not knowing what it means anymore in this new world.
Carol, I fully agree with Johnny when he says that, we got to be brutally honest with our people, because, no matter whatever said and done, we cannot guarantee their, the safety at all at our workplace. I will give you a very good example of mine, because, I work I run a manufacturing concern in a huge industrial park where about 85 industries are placed. And it's maddening the number of, as Johnny said, the number of safety measures that we have to take in the manufacturing concern, from the entrance to the work table and back home, the transport. You provide transport. I have about 500 workers. I have to provide transport for all of them, but fortunately, not all of them are coming to work these days, 1/3 of them. But you see, now, doing all that, still we cannot guarantee whether they would contract the disease at home and come to work. Of course, we will check their temperatures and everything before entrance, outside the doors, outside the gates. Now, today, the authorities, the health authorities and the law enforcement have gathered about, say, 60 HR managers of these enterprises in that particular zone. And what they, wanted to drive is, what are the, stringent health measures? And if we do not follow those stringent health measures, what will happen? And the law enforcement is coming up and saying, bringing in various laws, the numbers and all that, and you will be arrested, you will be. So I stood up and said that, no, does the government want us to run the industries and get our HR managers arrested for doing the work, for running the organizations? No, we cannot do that. This is one of the important messages we all have to drive to our governments, I suppose.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, there's some interesting thoughts here. I mean, to go back to the idea of principles, the reality is so much of work historically has been driven not just through government regulation, legislation, but internally within businesses, all about rules. Here's all your rules. This is what you got to do. As a profession, we've been rather adept at that. I keep saying it's about time we got rid of the sedimentary layers of endless policies which we've all written, because we want to write a rule about everything we can think about. And yet, interestingly, we know from human behavior that that's not what drives the right outcomes all the time. And here we find ourselves in this very fast-changing world and environment where it is impossible to legislate for everything that we want to legislate for anyway. So I think it is back to various really important things. It's not to say we don't need rules, because we do need some rules, but I think more about these principles. And Carol, when you ask what governments can do, I think it is about encouraging businesses to do the right things, to be more transparent, and particularly to be more transparent about what they're doing with their people, how they're treating them, and what they're doing to support their well-being, what they're investing in their training, and many things which we want to measure and understand as HR professionals. So I think that's an important part of the dialogue, and therefore when we are engaging with government, it's not let's write pages and pages of legislation with more and more rules. It's also going to be about, yeah, but what principles do we want to drive business that makes businesses act more responsibly, and that we recognize even within organizations today. If you think about how much more we've had to trust our people because we can't see them in our physical workspaces, managers having to trust their people to do the right things because they can't see them all the time. That, again, to me is a shift of principles and thinking, which we can build on and say, so we've learned to trust each other more. We've learned that when people are working from home, they're not working from home and doing nothing, which is what a lot of people have used to think about in the past. And I think it's those sorts of ideas that we need to take forwards as well. And a final thought on what governments can do, particularly for young people, is let's use this time also to reinvest in skills and training. I think there's a lot of opportunity now to say across workforces, not least within our own profession, that this is a really good time to rethink training, to rethink how we invest in skills, to make sure that we're equipping people for the future, particularly the much more uncertain future that we all recognize is ahead of us.
I think that one of the things that will set the tone for the rest of the pandemic is what we do today with our employees will set that gray line into a brighter days, because that will be the way that our employees will react to us when we go back. So what we do today, what we decide today will set that tone of the conversation with them afterwards. First of all, we have to care for them. We have to consider giving more psychological support, and the marketing will be, for me, what will help us out here. It will help us better communicate, wellness, and consider many more things for them so that we can work together. And if they have to work from home, start setting up a new culture for the companies. It is really important for us to start giving that empowerment to our leaders within the organizations. There's always this micromanaging style from certain CEOs that will have now to be a little bit more, they will have to be more lenient and more open to giving this, not only the leaders, but also all the employees that support and have that confidence that they will be delivering. We will start seeing more working for production rather than having you here 8 hours because I need to know that you're here 8 hours working for me. There's more openness on that side. So for us, definitely will be the caring for the people and having more direct communication with them on whatever decisions that we're gonna have to take. Either they are good or bad for them. We will have to be very transparent in order for them to talk about the company. If you have to lay off somebody, you have to say it in the best way that you can, and with that caring for them. That will set the tone for the whole conversation after that, and how they will talk about the company. So for me, that's one of the key points.
Thank you very much, Liselotte. Jorge, you're next.
Thank you very much, Carol. I think that this is a great chance again to fulfill some space that is open whenever this crisis came up, and people look around to who is the leader, who is the one who have to lead, to follow as a leader. And I think this is a great chance after the post-virus in order to upgrade not only our technologies in the workplace, but also the competencies, using, as Peter said before, our all chances to upgrade training, but to the whole issue of competencies. I believe in the capital C's, which is the C of communications, the collaboration, and in order to get more commitment in order to our workforce. And when people looks around to what to do in these uncertain situations, I think HR has a key role to play within the organization, through the corporations, the corresponding companies, to influence the governments as well, not to do more laws or regulations, but to the opposite, to be more flexible and allow the companies itself and the respective workforce, unions or individuals to really set the tone instead of waiting for new regulations. That's my view on that. Thank you.
So Jorge, commitment, collaboration, cooperation, those are the three messages that should be delivered to government, that the profession
Correct.
is there too. Good.
Correct. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone
Yes.
on this? Okay. Anyone else? Well, let's move to our last bucket of discussion and the important discussion, the one that will bring everything you said, hopefully, to a strategy, to an approach of what do we do next. And to set the table, I'm going to ask Anthony Ariganello to speak to this. And we have a slide.
Thank you, Carol. In my opinion, the steps that are needed to be taken to get back to normal really include a number of activities. I believe we need buy-in from all levels of government. I mentioned government before, but not only at the federal level, but at the local municipal levels and, of course, provincial levels when I refer to Canada. Governments need to begin talking positively and less doom and gloom that we will be in this for another year to a year and a half. That may be the reality from scientists, but the population really needs positivity at this time. I also believe that we should be developing think tank groups to focus on problems and our ultimate goals. Clearly the workplace will change significantly, as we've just discussed, and we need to be ready for that. In that line of thinking, I'm suggesting consulting with both business and social economic leaders from all sectors, as we are not only dealing with a business issue, but as I mentioned, a health and mental crisis issue as well. We also need to develop a plan that establishes key measurables, and we should be focusing on an integration plan that is in a step mode rather than a linear one. We're not going to go up, in an L-shaped fashion. We should also be continuously communicating the plan and making adjustments where necessary. And lastly, in my view, I see more than ever HR leaders taking center stage with employers and government and various stakeholders, all supporting integration, in a very positive way. We really need to be focused on a positive message here that things will get back. Perhaps the timing is unknown, but we can't be thinking that it'll only happen once a cure is available. Ultimately that may be the case, but you can imagine that if this stretches beyond another 2-3 months in terms of staying at home, this will have humongous repercussions on individuals' health, not only because of the pandemic, but also because of mental health, and that is and financial health, and those are critical issues that we need to be mindful as we move forward. So we need to be speaking to various stakeholders, including government, about how do we get this thing moving forward in a positive way? Because I think, you know, when we listen to news shows like CNN and other news outlets, there's a lot of doom and gloom, and it's not necessarily healthy. And so I think we need to be mindful of that as we move forward and regenerate as HR leaders that positive message, Carol.
Well, thank you, Tony. A great way to get us started on this last topic of what happens now. What are our next steps? Tony put forward a number of ideas on the table. My question to you here is if I had found it, my question to you is, what are the opportunities in moving forward, these issues forward? What you've said today. As I said, we'll be doing an outcomes report. We'll be disseminating broadly this live stream. But then again, where are the other opportunities in moving this forward? And what can each of us, each of you do, each member of this great family? And is there anything that the collective desires to do? And again, go back to the key messages to try to summarize what the key messages are. But I'll turn it to the group. I don't see any hands up. Oh, there we go. Lucas.
Yeah, maybe from my side, and to build on what Anthony is saying, is basically I think there are only 2 or 3 issues we have to deal with to make it a bit more simple. I think the first thing is, obviously we will gradually reopen the economy. There's no doubt about that for me, that will happen on a gradual pace. And I think that our challenge is also for HR is to do that in an adjusted way, in a proper way, and in a safe way. So people will come back to work. There's no doubt about that for me, but we have to help there, to guide there, and to make that happen. And there's a big job for HR in helping out there. And the second thing is, I think that we should use the time and the money from not only in our own organizations, but also in our societies, to mitigate the impact of the socio-economic crisis, which will be the aftermath of that. And that is back to what I also said, we should learn from previous economic crises, the big recession as we had it, and the big depression, not to do it too quickly. Take the time and take the money, also the funding from the government and the central banks, to really take the time for that. Because if we don't take the time for that, I'm afraid that we will get into a more confrontational mode, and that is not good. And that brings me back to number 3, is that we should really make a deal about that, a social deal, if you like, not only on the level of societies, with all the stakeholders involved, but also within our own organizations and companies. And I think that HR directors have a natural role in getting such a deal together, moving forward, together with the employers, the employees, and other stakeholders. And by doing that, we should also, I think, integrate all of the good things we had in mind before we had this crisis, and speed them up and bring them into that new deal in the aftermath of this crisis. And that goes back to sustainability, that goes back to a more inclusive workforce, that goes back to a lot of other things we have always thought about as HR leaders. So we should not waste this crisis, but also in the deal after this crisis, bring it back on the table again and make this a better way, a better world and a better workplace moving forward. So only 3 things, I think, to make it more simple with the aftermath of this crisis. And we know crises, we have seen them before. So in that sense, it's not different than other crises.
Thank you, Lucas.
Carol, just to add some thoughts. I think I agree broadly, Lucas, although I'm not sure I would say this is, we've seen crises before like this one, but but I understand your point. I think the other thing I would add to your list is that we got to think very clearly about how we help the profession itself. I mean, we're all acknowledging that this is a time of opportunity. We can learn from it. HR can find itself in a different place. But if we're honest also, and I've often commented on this, that the profession itself has not been very good at investing in its own capabilities. You know, if you understand the expression, HR has often been the cobbler's children. You know, it doesn't have the good shoes, and we're beginning to see more of that. I think we're seeing it everywhere. And this is a time when HR has also got to really invest in itself. It's got to take itself more seriously, more professionally, building the skills, because not only is it an opportunity, but it's also exposing HR in many different ways and asking us many different challenges. I mean, Johnny, when you talked about a CEO spending all that time with his or her CHRO, I mean, these are all the signs we're seeing. So how do we build the right capabilities, and how do we get the profession to think more seriously about investment in itself? And this space, this time, I think creates a unique opportunity to do that, so that we really are building these more strategic skills, this ability to workforce plan in more strategic ways, to think through crises. How do we create cultures which are adaptable and agile? How do we build truly inclusive businesses, and all these other ideas? And they don't all happen by accident, and we need to be teaching and helping encourage and strengthen the profession as a result of this. And finally, by doing that or thinking about those things, what we can all learn from each other. Because again, I think as a profession, we haven't always been that good at kind of learning the lessons between each other. What are the things we have in common? And of course, there are contextual differences in different countries. But what are these sort of core principles which drive the profession? What are the core capabilities that we all need? And how do we come together more to describe more consistent, perhaps, frameworks of understanding, which we can share with the profession internationally and in every context in which we operate?
Reaction?
Yes, Carol. I have to, add to this. I agree with all these previous fellow panelists who spoke about what we have to do the post-crisis. True. In fact, once again, we all agree that this crisis is unprecedented. We've never experienced a kind of a situation in our lifetimes in the world. So, but my belief is that this crisis the post situation will bring in good results, as many of the speakers or many of the panelists contributed. It will be good result, and for not only for HR but for others as well. One important number one post-crisis is upskill, reskill, and multi-skill. This is one thing. And I also once again emphasize on my five points which I mentioned, and especially out of that, agility and communication and resilience are the most important. Of course, as Leila mentioned, one thing is empathy. You got to love and understand your people. They not as your employees, not as your workers, yes, your people in the world of work. So that is one thing. And also take, for example, as Peter mentioned, in every crisis, in every turbulence, every chaos, the people managers are the most overworked people in every situation of emergency. And we need to look at our profession very correctly, because they are the most overworked, and they are the people who are sandwiched between our employees and our employers, both. So that the HR managers need to be more educated in these kind of situations. And also I would like to finish with a small thing that which is one of the Asian tycoon and entrepreneur Ratan Tata said, that what he said is that experts are predicting huge downfall of economy due to corona. I do not know much about these experts, but I know for sure that they do not know anything about the value of human motivation and determined efforts. If experts were to be believed, after the total destruction in Second World War, Japan had no future, but the same Japan in just 3 decades or so made us cry at the marketplace. If the experts were to be believed, Israel should have been wiped out from the world map by the Arabs. But the fact is different. As per the rules of aerodynamics, the bumblebees cannot fly, but it flies because it does not know the rules of aerodynamics. If the experts were to be believed, we should have been nowhere in '83 Cricket World Cup. If the expert were to be believed, William Rudolph, the first American lady to win 4 Olympic golds in athletics, should not have been in the position to walk without barracks. No question of running. If the expert were to be believed, Arunima Singh, that is an Indian girl, had hardly led a normal life, but she climbed the Mount Everest. The corona crisis is no different. I do not have any doubt that we will defeat the corona hands down. And this is about the Indian economy. Ratan Tata says that Indian economy will bounce back in a greater manner. Likewise, the total economy of the world will bounce back, I suppose. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think this is probably a really good place to bring it to a close on this, Demika, very optimistic note. All of you, before we close, I can ask Leila and Anthony to say a few closing words. But I have to say, when I look at the participants, the comments, this has been a very inspiring discussion for all of us. And thank you for taking the time, this panel, impressive panel from around the world. So Leila, as president of WFPMA, would you like to say a few words?
Well, I'm proud. Excellent discussion about this moment all over the world. Thank you, Anthony, Carol, and all the speakers for your contribution to this WFPMA webinar. And thank you all the attendees for their presence in this WFPMA webinar. I'm proud. Thank you so much for your contribution. Have a nice day and safe and health. Thank you.
Thank you, Leila. And Anthony?
Just unmuting. I also want to say thank you to all the panelists and everyone who's agreed to participate today. You know, it's very meaningful. It's so apropos. And you know, what I really enjoyed about today is, for me, it's a first. I don't recall ever doing this on a global scale like this, where we've had leaders from around the world willing to participate in that. Maybe that's the new normal and we got something out of this crisis, but it is an opportunity for us to dialogue and really talk about something that's going to impact us all, not only as individuals, but as a global profession. So it's really appreciated that we've made the time to do this, and perhaps this will lend us an ability to do this going forward on various other matters that we all share in terms of experiences. So the time to act is now. I think this is a great start, and I really look forward to continuing on the deliberation. And also, don't forget, everyone, we will provide a video link with this, and we will share this to everyone who was unable to attend live. And also, if you wanted to disseminate this to your members individually within your federations and countries, you can do so. And also, we'll put together a report that we'll be able to make available through the WFPMA network through Carol's efforts. So again, I just want to say thank you, everyone, for agreeing to participate today and giving up your valuable time.
Thank you, everyone. And let me just sort of, before Liselot put a message that I want to read, not only to the panelists that can see it, but to all our participants. And she writes, even though the fourth digital revolution is here, the future depends on our humanity. Let's care for our people. So on that note, I wish you a nice evening, morning, or afternoon.
Thank you very much, Carol. You know, we would be remiss without thanking you very much.
Well, it was a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
It was very interesting. You're such dynamic group of people. My job is so easy. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Carol and Tony.
Thank you. Stay safe, everybody.
Thanks.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you for having us, and be safe. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Be safe.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.